In addition to providing selectors that work across generic elements of a document, jQuery also has a set of selectors and filters that are just used for dealing with form elements. And they work pretty much like any other selector, but they happen to start with a colon character like filters do. These kinds of selectors and filters make it really easy to build form processing logic using jQuery. So you can see the table here. This table lists the available selectors for form elements. So they pretty much match up directly with the names of the various form elements that you'll find in a document. So, for example, you have selectors for input and text and password and radio and checkbox submit all the way down. You can use these to select those individual kinds of elements on the form. So, in addition to selectors, there's form filters, and these are the form filters that are available. So there's only a few of these, and they're essentially convenience filters to help you select form elements that are in a certain state. So for example, we have a filter for enabled and disabled, and we've got a filter for checked and selected. So for example, the checked one matches form elements that are checked, and obviously that applies only to radio buttons and checkboxes, whereas the enabled and disabled will match form elements that match that state. So let's go ahead and fire up our code editor and take a look at a couple of form examples. So I'm going to jump over to the code here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the form selectors underscore start.html file, and that's in the chapter 2 section of the exercise files folder. Now, if you've got access to the exercise files, you can open this up in your own text editor or just follow along with me watching the movie, or you can go ahead and skip ahead to the underscore finished version to see how everything works. So I'm going to go ahead and open this in my editor. So this example is a little bit different than the other examples we've looked at so far. So let's begin by looking at the design view. And you can see here what we have is a source file with several form fields in it. And we got some input fields, we got some radio buttons and checkboxes and some other things. So let's go back to the source and take a look at how we use jQuery to select each of the form elements. Okay, so up here in my document ready function, I'm going to start by writing my query. And I'm going to do things a little bit differently than I did in my previous examples. In my previous examples, I was surrounding elements with a red border box, but not every browser supports doing that with form elements. So I'm going to do something a little bit different. Let's begin by selecting form elements that are input fields. So I'm going to type form and then colon input. And then to show you visually that the selector is working, I'm going to type before. And this is just going to put some text before the selected elements. So instead of doing the red border, I'm going to do this. Okay. So what this is going to do is select all the input elements of the form and then put the word input in front of the form element. So let's save. Let's go over to the browser and refresh. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this in the form. Okay, so you can see that when I refresh the document, the word input got put in front of every form element that is an input element. And since all of these elements are input elements, you can see that the radio buttons and the checkboxes and the text fields and everything had the word input put in front of it. Okay, so let's get a little bit more specialized. Let's go back to the code. So back here in the code, let's try something else. Let's comment this out, and then we'll copy and paste. What we're going to do this time is select text elements. So in this case, we're going to change this to text, and we're going to put the word text in front of all the text elements. So I'm going to save, and we're going to go back to the browser. And now when I refresh, you can see that only the text elements have been selected by that jQuery selector. So none of the other input elements now have text in front of them, only these two guys do. And let's go over to the Firefox browser so I can show you it working there. Okay, here's the same document, and I refresh, and you can see that the word text got inserted based on the query that we wrote in front of the text elements. Now let's go back to the source. What I'm going to do now is comment this guy out, and I'm going to switch over to design view, and I'm going to insert a row in front of this guy. Now you could do this using whatever HTML or text editor that you're using. What I'm doing is inserting a table row, and I'm going to put in a disabled element, and I'm going to put in a text field using my toolbox. And again, you can use whatever favorite HTML that you're using. Okay, so now I'm going to make this guy disabled. So we'll go to the source, and we'll type disabled equals disabled. Okay, so he's disabled now, and what we're going to do is write another query that shows how to select elements that are enabled. So let's copy and paste there. We'll uncomment. So what we're going to do now is just do form and text, but we're going to put the enabled filter on it. And so I'm going to change this to read enabled. I'm going to save. So now what this will do is put the word enabled in front of text fields, but only the enabled ones. So let's switch back to the browser. Okay, and I'm going to refresh. And you can see that even though I've got 3 text fields, only the enabled ones have the word enabled in front of them. This disabled guy does not have text in front of it. Okay, so let's take a look at Firefox. Okay, here's the Firefox version. And I refresh, and you can see that it's working there as well. Let's go back to the source. So if I were to change this to disabled, then the reverse would happen. Only the disabled field would have the text in front of it. Okay, so let's comment this. Okay, so for the next example, what we're going to do is show how to use jQuery to select items that are checked. So let's go back to the design view, and we're going to have some items that are checked by default. So what we're going to do is check this radio button, and this checkbox, and this checkbox. So let's go into the source and do that, and I'm going to, let's say this guy equals checked, and we'll check this first checkbox as well. And we'll copy that and put it on this one as well. So let's go back to the design view. So you can see now that several of the elements are checked, this radio button and these checkboxes. Let's go back to the jQuery code now. And let's go to the top. What we're going to do now is write a selector that selects form elements that are checked. And I'm going to use just the filter by itself here. And I'm going to write before, and I'm going to insert some text that says checked. Okay, so let's save. Let's go back to the browser and see what happens. Okay, here we are in the browser. I'm going to refresh. And you can see that only elements that are checked, including the radio button and these checkboxes, have the word checked put in front of them, whereas these unchecked items, these 2 checkboxes and this radio button, do not. So that's pretty useful, and you can see how jQuery would be really powerful for processing form elements, selecting things that are checked and enabled and so on. Let's do one more example. What we're going to do now is only select checkboxes that are checked. So we're going to write a short query that ignores the radio button. Okay, let's go back to the source. Okay, so here we are in the source, and I'm going to comment this guy out and do a copy and a paste. And I'm going to save. So now I'm going to write in front of the checked filter just :check box. What this is going to do now is look inside a form for all the checkboxes that have checked. And I'm going to save. Okay, let's go out to the browser again. Okay, so now when I refresh, you can see that the word checked does not appear in front of the radio button, only the checkboxes. And I could change the code to go back, and instead of writing checkbox, I could write radio button. Let's go back over to Firefox and see it there. Okay, so I'm going to refresh, and you can see it's working here as well. Okay, so that's how you use jQuery to process form elements. You can see that this is a very powerful feature. It makes form processing a lot easier. Let's go ahead and move on.